bosses of Reddit, what's the craziest thing you've seen an employee do? I was doing a weekly call monitor on one of my better employees and found he was doing an Indian accent. I was a bit surprised, so I went back and listened to 5+ calls of his from that week and found he was doing different impressions for almost every call. Arnold Schwarzenegger, Mickey Mouse, Apu from The Simpsons, a pretty solid Christopher Walken, and a few others. I've done this before, had a buddy and we were both temping at a call center. We would challenge each other to different accents. It was an outbound call center, so most people hung up after you said who you were. I got stuck on a long call trying to keep up a flamboyant hillbilly accent. I stopped playing after that. When I was a kid working at a grocery store, another cashier would often buy and then chug a half gallon of milk to get sick to go home. Job was horrid, so it was entertaining at the time. Guy that worked for me was getting out of his car one morning and saw one of the other managers in the company, so started talking to him. In the middle of the conversation he whipped his deck out and started peeing on the side of his car. He was 37 years old, sober, and it was 8 in the morning. This was for a corporate job. Lol, power move well played. I manage a small weld shop. Generally, I don't care about less than clean background checks or pot, as long as you come into work every day and get sheet done. Finding reliable welders is difficult, so a lot of sheet flies. This sometimes leads to weird employees. This one guy we hired stopped showing up. After like 3 days, he walks in the door. Has bright red from being sunburned to sheet, and his clothes are torn to shreds. Dude was drinking on a little aluminum boat and somehow got lost at sea. He looked like Tom Hanks from Castaway. He didn't have cell phone reception, so he wasn't able to call me. He did take a bunch of pictures over the few days he was lost at sea, though, including one where he was being rescued by the Coast Guard. I gave him the rest of the week off. Coast Guard took him to the hospital. He checked himself out and immediately came into work. Didn't even go home and shower. Odd dude. Had a see-through water bottle that was filled with vodka. He started the day off fine, but was legless by lunch. Drove him home 40 minutes each way because he couldn't afford a cab. Talked the owner out of firing him, and instead we helped him get into a program. That was 4 years ago. Has the production manager now. Model employee now, in fact. I was a valet captain at an expensive restaurant with the parking lot 2 blocks away, and one of the valets I was supervising took a wrong turn in a customer's 2016 47 rupees and ended up getting pulled over and arrested for going 110 in a 70 on the interstate. I had an employee call a French woman a frog and then start ribbiting. That was kinda awkward. Back when I was a gas station clerk, my manager would deal drugs while on the clock. He'd take people into the back office to talk to. We all knew what he was doing, mostly because he all but admitted it, and because we all knew. Someone eventually said something, and then the company tried to make him take a drug test. He just quit instead. Never saw who did it, but someone curled out a meatloaf-sized turd into an office plant pot one evening. It must have happened straight after work, because the cleaners arrived around 6:30 p.m. and refused to touch it. Over 10 years ago now and office folklore. Never found out who did it. I thought you were going to say over 10 years ago now and no one has cleaned it up yet.
N.
A guy went for his lunch break and came back drunk. We were delivery drivers. Man, that doesn't sound too bad. I bet lots of people have. We were delivery drivers. Oh shit. I had an employee call and tell me her mother died. Well, I got an anonymous phone call from someone telling me she was lying, so I called the number one had on file to send my regards and I get an address to send flowers. In the meantime, the office had collected an envelope of money to help with the costs of the funeral and missing work. When I called, the mother answered and was shocked to find out her daughter used her death as an excuse to go to Vegas for the weekend. When she returned, I held a big meeting with everyone in the office and presented her with the envelope of money and flowers. She took it and faked cried. I called her into my office to reveal that I knew and fired her and took the envelope back. She said she don't give a duck and left. As a sergeant in the army, my unit was out on a 2-week field exercise. One of my soldiers decided to drink a dozen boxes of shelf-stable whole milk. He gets sick and has to go back to the rear. We find out later that he is quite lactose intolerant and knew it for years before going to the field. He bragged to some of his buddies about the scam, and one of the other NCOs heard him. That started the investigation that got him demoted for malingering. Had an employee that was always falling asleep while riding around from job to job. It was time for him to get his 450 for the company and had to travel about 2 hours away for testing. Halfway into his trip we checked where he was, and the truck had been running for an hour about 45 minutes from the test site at a truck stop. Had to call a gas station at and go wake him up. Still hadn't contacted me. About 30 minutes later we get a call from a guy that he had run off the road. The company name and number is on the side of the truck. We checked the GPS and it showed him driving 70 miles per hour down to 20 miles per hour right around the time the incident happened. He ended up passing his test and making it back to the shop. I asked him what the duck is he on? Heroin? He said, no, I was smoking meth all night. Honesty isn't always the best policy. We had a guy that would vanish in the middle of the day for roughly 3 to 4 hours, then return at the end of the day. Come to find out he would go home during that time, play with his dogs, smoke weed and then come back to work. When we had to sit him down and explain he couldn't just leave, he totally flipped out and told us all to go F ourselves and to effing fire him. He got a warning and still works here, and ours still does nothing when he disappears. Saw a dude fall asleep on a stand-up forklift. How tired must you be to do that? I fell asleep on a ladder when I worked a lot of random hours. Being awake for 20 to 30 hours straight can do that to you. This guy always tried to hide at work to avoid working. One day I was looking for him and I stepped into the bathroom. I notice a shoe print on the back of the toilet and I look up and one of the ceiling tiles is pushed a little to the side. I climb up there and this mother ducker is hiding in the ceiling. Gotta admire that ceiling construction though. Had an employee go for a drug test mandatory for all drivers with a CDL. He used his 10-year-old son's urine and warmed it up on the defroster in his car on the way to the test center. The center called and told us they were surprised he was alive. His urine was 130 degrees. Needless to say he wasn't employed much longer. Went out for smoke breaks like 5x a day, eventually got to a point where he couldn't wait to get outside and would light up in the elevator to get a head start. 2 days after that mishap he took his lunch break and came back very drunk. I think he worked a grand total of 7 days hired to fired. I was the evening manager of a grocery store while going through college. I had one employee that had a hard time doing what he was asked to do. Anyways, without getting into too much detail, he asked to go home early one night. I said he could go home after he finished facing the soda aisle, easiest aisle to face. He got angry. He took his box cutter, started at one end of the aisle, and ran down the soda aisle cutting all the 2-liter bottles on the shelf. Then he walked out of the store. I wasn't even mad. It was funny to watch. I got to fire a bad employee, and I got a little bit of overtime pay for cleaning up the mess. We had a trainee show up for her first day. She proceeded to go to the bar and order a mixed drink, and took it to her seat to take the first menu test. The trainer came over and asked if she was drinking an alcoholic drink, to which she responded yes. The trainer told her that they weren't allowed to drink on the job, to which her response was, oh, you mean like hard liquor? That's cool, I'll just get a beer. When she discovered that no alcoholic beverages were to be consumed on shift, she fumed out, stating, I can't work here. Took a temp job leading the Santos village at Base Pro while waiting on my contract to start at my career job. The people you hire are usually interesting. One girl on her first shift was on her phone as I walked back to the department. I wasn't in uniform yet but told her, you weren't supposed to be on your phone on shift. She screams, who the FK are you? I walked away, clocked in, wrote her up, and came back to her with write up. She turned out to be one of the better employees.